17 years ago, in 1999, a straight white cis male who believes capitalism is fabulous was writing the following, quote, "All forms of collectivism rest on a certain metaphysics. The collectivist tenets in economics that production is primarily a social effort, in politics that the group, not the individual, has rights, in ethics that the individual must sacrifice his interests to the needs of society, in epistemology that the judgment of an individual mind is subordinate to the collective consensus, all stem from a deeper premise, that the individual is impotent to cope with reality. The individual, on this premise, cannot sustain his life on his own and must depend upon the group for survival." This viewpoint, as applied to women, is what feminism essentially promulgates. Of all the supposedly demeaning views of women for which feminists condemn our allegedly patriarchal society, none is remotely as denigrating as that held by feminism itself. It is, today, uniquely feminists who depict women as congenitally helpless, endlessly victimized creatures. Now, fast forward to the current year, and taxpayers are now paying for feminist PhD candidates to write dissertations that essentially argue that women and Negroes are simply too inferior to be able to cope with mathematics and science. I mean, Peter Schwartz might have been too gentle 17 years ago. Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. It is getting harder and harder to make the case that feminism is not a mental disorder per se, especially once you take a closer look at what passes for enlightened intellectual feminist thought in the academia these days. And now I already feel dirty for using the word intellectual next to the word feminist. Perhaps I should demand a safe space from this insanity. Anyway, let's dive into this latest gem of utter insanity. Coming from the University of North Dakota, a dissertation written by the doctoral candidate Laura Parson, who purports to have made a comprehensive study entitled "Are STEM Syllabi Gendered? A Feminist Critical Discourse Analysis." Now, if you think this sounds more like "Are STEM Syllabi Haram?", a scholarly Islamic critical discourse analysis, you would of course be correct, but you would also underestimate just how far down the hole of disorder this individual actually is. I mean, I'm actually willing to consider that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, that will be the head of ISIS, who is also a highly respected Islamic scholar, would write a superior paper to this garbage. Anyway, let's read Conceptual Framework, page 103, quote, "This study was framed through the lens of post-structuralist feminist thought to provide a lens through which I explored how power is gendered. Post-structuralism rejects objectivity and the notions of an absolute truth and single reality, and knowledge is complicated, contradictory, and contingent to a certain social context and historical context. For post-structural feminists, emphasis is placed on language and discourse, regarded as constitutive of experience and not simply representative of it. As such, discourse analysis is a key tool of post-structuralist researchers because the link between power and knowledge can be seen by exploring language in use. Analysis of text looks for practical ideologies to uncover what is framed as logical ways of thinking that in reality perpetuate inequality. Since patriarchal gender ideology is structural, it is enacted in institutions and reflected in institutional texts. Therefore, the tasks of feminist CDA is to examine how power and dominance are discursively produced and or resisted in a variety of ways through textual representations of gendered social practices. Through a framework of post-structuralist feminist thought, this discourse analysis uncovers the ways that gender practices that favor men are represented and replicated in the syllabus. Now, allow me to translate that into English, though I have to admit it is harder to translate this garbage into English than to translate long articles from Norwegian into English. Anyway, so basically, what she's saying is that there is a vast patriarchal conspiracy within STEM departments, of which she is not part of, that oppresses women through language. And the existence of this conspiracy is very important to be addressed because it keeps women out from STEM. She also further says that she doesn't care if there is insufficient evidence for what she asserts because she is looking at the situation through a perspective that a priori rejects objectivity and any notion of reality or truth. She has her own truth and you'd better listen and believe. There is no absolute truth, the mantra goes. I guess we are to presume that this rule does have, though, an exception, namely the absolute truth of the statement that there is no absolute truth. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a white male and I don't even have a degree in sociology, so I guess my truth doesn't count because power plus privilege minus penis or something. Anyway, let's read some more. Gender, page 105. Quote, although limited research has been conducted on the gendered nature of the STEM syllabi, post-structuralist feminist thought provides insight into the exploration of STEM syllabi as gendered. Through a post-structuralist lens, it is possible to make a comparison between a modernist view of knowledge as based on notions of absolute truth and a single reality, which is masculine, and the social construction of knowledge, where knowledge is unstable and informed by context. Traditionally, epistemic privilege has been located in academic disciplines. The disciplinary training of many physical scientists eschews alternative paradigms of knowledge production and produces structural challenges to thinking and researching outside of these frames. The view of knowledge as socially constructed challenges the modern male concept of power. Traditionally, the view of education, especially science education, was that the job of the teacher is to be the all-knowing expert who deposited his knowledge into students. A view of knowledge as absolute or static results in a view of teaching that follows the banking pedagogy, where knowledge is deposited by the teacher and retrieved on examination day. Students in this model are passive recipients and their job is to learn the knowledge. The traditional teaching method is lectures and assessments are primarily quizzes, midterms, and exams. In contrast, a more dynamic view or subjective of knowledge views knowledge as something that students need to engage with to learn, which may be reflected in more progressive or critical pedagogies. This is reflected in syllabi through collaborative and active learning and advanced cognitive skills like application and analysis. Within the syllabi, statements about knowledge as static and teaching methods that reflect that epistemological belief reinforce the existing male hierarchy. Through a post-structuralist lens, one way to explore the gendered nature of STEM syllabi, especially in the absence of gendered cues that may occur more often in spoken communications, is by examining the syllabi of these more subtle indications of how knowledge, teaching, and learning are viewed. Skipping a bit. One of the reasons cited as causing the gender gap in STEM education, where women are more likely to change their major to a non-STEM field, is the masculine environment of STEM higher education that creates a classroom environment that is male-normed, highly impersonal, and individualistic. Called a chilly climate, this leads to a classroom environment that is not welcoming, inclusive, or supportive of women. Examples of STEM classroom practices that contribute to a chilly climate are weed-out courses that grade on a curve, a competitive environment, a reliance on lecture as a teaching method, an individualistic culture, and comprehensive exams. For this discourse analysis, I explored STEM syllabi for language use that perpetuated a chilly climate or the practices that have been found to cause it. Let me say, what, Google? So, translation into English. Women oftentimes change their major from STEM to non-STEM, not because they think STEM is not for them, but because the language of STEM is masculine. I mean, she is unequivocally saying that women are simply unfit for STEM courses. They're just too dumb and thus inferior that they simply cannot woman up and put on their adult pants and start accumulating knowledge and compete like the rest of us. Now, our esteemed intellectual also implicitly admits that this is part of female nature, since nowhere in this long diatribe of barely intelligible nonsense is she advocating for any sort of changes in behaviors and attitudes within women themselves. No. You see, that would be haram. Sorry, I mean, that would be against the post-structuralist worldview. Instead, what she advocates is what you would expect from a post-structuralist, i.e. someone thinking beyond structures, namely to create new structures. Wait, what? That doesn't really make sense, does it? In any event, she's basically saying that comprehensive exams are bad for women, which translated into plain language means that women are unwilling or incapable of putting in the appropriate amount of work for those exams. She's also saying that women are incapable of coping with the inherently emotionless nature of scientific and technical fields, and the solution to this problem is more feelings into the curricula and syllabi. No, I'm not joking. Let's read further from page 111, where she discusses her findings. Long quote again, but it's so fascinating that I can't help it from sharing with you. So, where was it? Okay, quote. Initial exploration of the STEM syllabi in this study did not reveal overt references to gender, such as through the use of gendered pronouns. However, upon deeper review, language used in the syllabi reflects institutionalized STEM teaching practices and views about knowledge that are inherently discriminatory to women and minorities by promoting a view of knowledge as static and unchanging, a view of teaching that promotes the idea of a passive student, and by promoting a chilly climate that marginalizes women. So the fact that there is a correct way of solving, let's say, differential equations marginalizes women and is inherently discriminatory towards minorities. Okay. Let's read a little bit more. First, the STEM syllabi explored in this analysis promoted the male-biased STEM institution by reinforcing views of knowledge as static and unchanging, as it is traditionally considered to be in science, which is a masculine concept of knowledge. Are you fucking kidding me? Now look, I'm trying really hard here not to just call her a degenerate fucktard and get over this topic. And for the Americans watching this, you guys are paying for this shit with your tax dollars. I mean, next time you meet a tax dodger, just go to him and congratulate him. I mean, he is successfully avoiding being stolen from in order to pay for this kind of nonsense. Jesus Christ. So, notions like the fact that, I don't know, gravity exists are just reinforcing views of knowledge as static and is a masculine concept of knowledge. Now I wonder, how is the feminine concept of knowledge when it comes to gravity? I mean, we know what is the feminist concept of knowledge when it comes to gravity, but I doubt that women in general are extremely keen on adopting that one just to be different from the masculine science. But then again, what do I know? Anyway, let's read some more. Quote, "Syllabi promote the positivist view of knowledge by suggesting that there are correct conclusions that can be drawn with the right tools. A critical thinker considers all available evidence with an open mind and uses appropriate techniques to analyze that evidence and reach a conclusion." Lower level geology. The main goal is to attain knowledge and comprehension of major concepts and techniques of organic chemistry, that is, from upper level chemistry. As these examples show, the STEM syllabi explored in this study demonstrated a view of knowledge that was to be acquired by the student, which promotes a view of knowledge as unchanging. This is further reinforced by the use of adverbs to imply certainty, such as actually and in fact, which are used in syllabi to identify information as factual and beyond dispute. For example, quote, "Draw accurate conclusions from scientific data presented in different formats," close quote, from lower level mathematics. Instead of promoting the idea of knowledge, the idea that knowledge is constructed by the student and dynamic, subject to change, as it would in a more feminist view of knowledge, the syllabi reinforce the larger male-dominant view of knowledge as one that students acquire and use, make the correct decision. You know, I gotta concede one point to this particular freak. I mean, she is at the very least honest that she's not analyzing the masculine concept of knowledge versus an alleged feminine concept of knowledge. No, she explicitly mentions that she's analyzing what she thinks is the masculine concept of knowledge versus a feminist view of knowledge, thus admitting, perhaps unwittingly, two important aspects. One, that feminism is not feminine, a fact about which every single person who is not mentally insane is already aware of. And two, that feminism's purpose is inherently anti-masculine and thus misandric in nature, which again is something that every single sane person on the planet already knows. You know, most feminists are unwilling to admit these things despite being glaringly obvious outside of their tiny lesbianic cult. So we should give props to this particular freak for at least being bloody honest about her demented beliefs. Now, going beyond this admission, it is fair to ask, how would a feminist view of knowledge apply to computer science or to studying the laws of physics? I mean, she says here that the feminist view of knowledge is, quote, "knowledge as constructed by the student and dynamic subject to change," unquote. So, I don't know, can the student feel that today gravitational acceleration is not 9.80665 meters per square second? Can a student feel that a machine's boot sequence is different today and thus the said sequence changes by itself? Serious question. One more quote. Page 112, quote, "Instead of only listing prerequisite courses, these syllabi included prerequisite knowledge and skills, creating an even more intimidating view of the course. That language implied that not only would students be held to difficult, high standards, but also that there was also a base of knowledge that was required to be successful in the course. While it is not unrealistic to include prerequisites in a syllabus, the language used to discuss the prerequisites indicated that students who had not learned or did not remember that knowledge would be unsuccessful because there was not support within the course or from the instructor. The language used in this corpus of syllabi created an impression of extremely difficult courses, which contributes to the chilly climate in STEM courses and would be prohibited for those not confident in those areas, such as women and minorities. Additionally, a chilly climate is reinforced with a focus on the individual instead of the group and is characteristic of a masculine learning environment. So, in other words, expecting students who take a class in, let's say, upper level chemistry to actually be already proficient enough in chemistry so they can build up on that knowledge is ipso facto prohibitive to women and Negroes? Because let's face it, when she says minorities, she doesn't mean the Indian minority or the Polish minority or the South Korean minority or the Japanese minority or in some cases the white minority in general, because little known fact is that the so-called black colleges still do exist. When she says minorities, she actually means Negroes. Now, if Donald Trump had said that women and Negroes just can't cut the mustards for mathematics, everyone would have gone full Macintosh about it, and probably for good reason. Yet for some reason, the American taxpayers have to pay for this idiot to spout such drivel. Now, admittedly, using highly pretentious language, but drivel nonetheless. Now, on to group learning point. It is true that some STEM fields, mathematics and computer science in particular, are fields that are an individual thing a lot more than a group one. Chemistry, for instance, is more geared to group projects. But still, even in mathematics, there have been some stellar group projects in mathematics history, but I will assume progressives would not want to talk about them. I mean, look at this. The Cauchy-Bunyakovsky-Schwarz inequality. I mean, such thing is inherently and extremely triggering. I mean, not only it is completely incomprehensible for any progressive, but it's also postulated by three white cishet men that postulate inequality as an unavoidable and axiomatic fact. That's triggering. And the problem, or rather the beauty, I would argue, the beauty of mathematics is that mathematics doesn't care if you're triggered. You either have your numbers right or you don't. Your sex, your race, your culture, your politics, none of that matters. Well, maybe your politics do matter because mathematics has consistently been progressive free, and I suspect it will continue to be so because every time progressives attempted to meddle in with mathematics, they either failed or turned the department away from proper mathematics, and thus the field itself remained unaffected. You just can't have progressive mathematics. Now, I can already hear the typing. Lucian, but why do you care? It's just a small college in the flyover country. Well, I do care because this kind of cancer has a track record of spreading sooner rather than later. I also care out of purely selfish reasons. I want there to be a future generation of engineers and mathematicians that are busy doing the research for the next cool thing, like teleportation, or the cure for HIV, or some form of cancer, or maybe a piece of technology that cannot yet be imagined, but that would improve human life tremendously. And I also care about capitalism that would make these things affordable very fast once they're out there in the marketplace. These kinds of individuals, like Laura Parson, are against both of these things. They're against science being studied and forwarded purely for racist and sexist reasons. And they're also against capitalism for largely the same reasons, plus the fact that capitalism provides the opportunity for people like me and you to vote with our wallets against feminism. They really don't like that. The inseparable link between free markets and free men really does bother the feminists. This is why I do advocate for a complete abandonment of the universities. Because only by voting with our wallets against these kinds of idiots can we make a difference. Of course, most of my friends in the academia don't agree with me because they genuinely think that they can reform the system from the inside. But this kind of lunacy has been growing like the cancer it actually is for decades. there was plenty of time to address it and prevent it from catching roots. Now I would say the time is up. And don't worry, we have this kind of degeneracy in Europe as well, but the only reason we hear less about it is because universities in continental Europe don't have this campus culture mentality, because the campuses don't really exist in a physical format. So most students don't really socialize with each other outside of the time spent between the classes. However, from a taxpayer perspective, we do have it worse here, since there are very few private universities worth mentioning in continental Europe, because the UK and Ireland are more like the United States in this regard. Now, the fact that this kind of garbage exists should per se be worrying at the very least. The fact that I was able to find it on the university's website means that someone actually approved it. Some intellectual thinks this is good enough to be at least subjected to further testing instead of outright dismissal. And probably this is why I'm not a university professor. Because if I had been this chick's professor and she'd come up to me with this, I would have asked her in the most polite and non-harassing way that I could to eat the manuscript while I watch. As an alternative, I would have offered the option of a disciplinary expelling for attempted closing of the synapses of the university's collective brain. There is such thing as being so open-minded till your brains fall out, and tolerating such ridiculousness is way beyond that point. Anyway, with all of that being said, thank you all for watching, and thank you for your continuous support. I guess I'll see you soon on Freedom Alternative.